Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you very much. Well, I'm Paul Edmonds from a company called Cornerstone and Partners. We're a management consultancy business, but I'm a big fan of BITA. And what we're going to be talking to everybody today is introducing John Manning from Arthur Ellis. I've known John for, I don't know, it's quite a few years now. 10, maybe?
10
getting
years,
close
yeah.
to that.
Yeah,
getting on
too long.
Yeah. Arthur Ellis as an organisation are a member of BITA, and John in particular is a kind of has been a friend to BITA and BITA X. John very kindly did one of the original events with BITA X, where he came out and actually did an event where we actually were allowed to meet people, which was fantastic. Talked about his own personal journey, which was incredibly impactful for everybody in the room. So I'm here just to introduce John. So Arthur Ellis as an organisation started about 3 years ago, so still relatively new. They have 30 people working in the team. John will build on that slightly. They work with schools, they work with large corporates, they work with lots of us SMEs, I guess. John is a fellow of the RSA and he's spoken at Cambridge Union, very well thought of. Got his own radio show, or I think a guest on a radio show in Milton Keynes. So his voice and the way that he does business is being communicated across many channels. So I've always thoroughly enjoyed working with him. That is all I'm going to say about you, John. Otherwise, go straight to you. If you can add anything on top of that before I throw in a few questions at you.
Yeah, you're right. Usually it is just my voice. So people, unfortunately, have got the unfortunate of staring at my face for a little while. So usually it's just the voice. But yeah, my views, I suppose, on mental health are relatively unique. So I've been asked to share what they are quite a bit over the last few years. And Arthur Ellis, started about 3 years ago, and it was mainly to tackle the issues surrounding what develops with mental health. Usually they are just shone a light on rather than solved. That's what awareness has kind of done, and we've seen mental health issues escalate over the last 12 years or so. So really we wanted to develop solutions around it. So set to work about 3 years ago on doing that. And yeah, like you said, we're now a team of 30, working all across the country, and we've set up a group of businesses. So we're actually in a group where we work with corporates in one area of the business, and work with schools, and we work with within our training and all of that sort of stuff. But then that feeds and revenue we donate directly into a social enterprise, so that we can build an accessible mental health service for children and young people across the country. So we've got around 400 clients in that area now, that the businesses that we're working with are supporting to actually access help where it might not be accessed elsewhere.
Fantastic. John's going to unpack a little bit more on some of the kind of strategies that maybe you'd want to employ, or at least consider when you're in a business. Can I ask you with a very simple question to kick off with? So the definition of well-being, how would you at Arthur Ellis define that?
Yeah, so some of the people who work with us are within clinical psychology. Some of them got master's degrees coming out their ears. So I've covered it an awful lot with them, just like, how do you actually define it? And well-being is our state of being comfortable, happy and healthy. Okay. So it's not necessarily just from day to day, it's throughout our entire lives, how we behave, our lifestyles, everything that's contributing towards us feeling comfortable, happy and ultimately being healthy.
Okay, and so just now the elephant in the room is obviously we're going through a bit of a difficult time at the moment. So just as a comparison, also I'd love to know how you've seen things evolve in the last 6 months. But what does today look like compared to 7 months ago? What is the big difference you've seen?
Yeah, 7 months ago it's interesting because we've got quite a unique position of working with big corporates, but then also working with individual people and communities through the different businesses Arthur Ellis is made up of. So we can see the impact that the last 7 months has had on individual people in different situations, in different from different backgrounds and in different circumstances. We've also seen it on businesses, and back in March, February, a lot of businesses in particular were focused on raising awareness and breaking down stigma, and it's absolutely right to do that. But now what we've seen is the transition into needing to have services in place and needing to have different things in place rather than just talking about it. It needs to go a step further. Before lockdown, the access to mental health services was quite poor. So people, even if they did reach out, and in the last few years, running up to the beginning of this year, referrals into mental health services went up about 300% across the country. And that's what awareness had done. You know, people were talking about it, it was working. But without the services in place, waiting lists and access to support can extend for up to 2 years, waiting for an appointment. So really the need for it to be actionable and it to be solution based has really accelerated. And the use for digital technology, we work with quite a few digital firms, and one of them said that technology has advanced for about 5 years the rate that it was. So we're 5 years more advanced now than we were with technology. So we've had to adopt that, and a lot of people are adopting that in order to gain support.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I were talking offline before about that the calls to domestic abuse lines had gone up like 700%. So you're seeing something very similar as far as people reaching out and asking for help.
Yeah, it's not necessarily just the amount of people reaching out has gone up. So in March, in our one-to-one service, we began gaining as many referrals that we would see in a month in one day. So it went up sort of 30-fold really. And it's not necessarily just the amount of issues that people are experiencing, but it's also the severity of what people are experiencing as well has gone up an awful lot. So we're not necessarily just seeing more issues, but they're worse issues as well, and they're coming to us because they're not being picked up elsewhere. So I don't think the infrastructure in the country and the way that we're dealing with it is equipped to be able to deal with the severity of issues. So that's why we need more solutions focused.
No, and I know you're going to unpack some of these things a bit later on, and I don't want to dwell too much on the stigma that goes along with this. But from a personal point of view, we're all in the same boat. I lost a lot of my clients, a few months back and what have you, and there definitely were a few days where there was a bit of a wobble going on about exactly what the world could look like. Getting back into the workplace and physically. Now I'm working from home, I did before, so that's not a big issue for me, but for some people who have been out of that workspace and now are having to face the reality that their employers are asking them to go back in, what does that look like, and what is that creating, what worry is that creating in those people?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was speaking to a business we support down in London, and they were saying that they're having trouble getting their employees back into the office, but if they invite them to the pub, then they'll go. And it's quite interesting to see this different dynamic, and the way that well-being is typically structured, which I'll go into more later on, but we all have these things, and in psychology they're called protective factors. So we all have things built around our lives that are called protective factors, and they're things that we do that protect the different structures of well-being that we've built up in our lives. So a couple of examples would be brushing our teeth. We don't really think about it, it's just something that we do, but that protects our health. It goes towards protecting our health. It's also exercise and different things. So all of these behaviors that we have are called protective factors, and if we experience something like you said about maybe losing some clients or hitting a change in our lives, however stressful that might be, it could be moving house or going through a divorce or something like that, we all experience different things like that, and it impacts our protective factors or our ability to do them. So sometimes they can get replaced with more negative behaviours, which are called maintenance factors. The word maintenance can be a little bit misleading, but it maintains the state that you're in. So if you look at the symptoms of something like depression, where the typical symptoms would be maybe staying in bed, feeling lethargic, not wanting to communicate with people, maybe isolating yourself, those symptoms can be seen as maintenance behaviours. They'll keep you in that cycle of depression. So protective factors are there to break that cycle and to get you out of it. So what we've seen through lockdown, and with people working from home and people having more time on their hands from not commuting, for example, they've been able to focus on their protective factors a lot more and focus on things that are positive for their well-being, like walking, spending time either online with friends or going for walks with people. The amount of people walking has been ridiculous. I don't know if anyone's been out just to their local park or something, but everybody's been outside. It's been really wonderful. We've been lucky with the time of year that it's fallen in. So everybody's been able to, if we look at it in this way, that people have been able to enhance and spend time on their positive behaviours, then the risk of going back to work for the individual, for the staff, is that these protective factors won't be maintained, they won't be upheld. So there's a risk of maintenance factors coming in, and it's quite subconscious for a lot of people. People don't really think about it in this way, but that's what happens. So it's I wouldn't say that there are people who are worried about the virus and worried about their health, but in a lot of cases we're seeing it that more people are concerned about their lifestyle that may change instead.
Okay, that's excellent. With my business hat on, we look at if you're running a business, you've got a lot of people working for you. You've got to look at the implications of investing time into this and doing it properly. And I said, trying to put to one side just the human aspect, which is the reason we should do it. What are the implications if we don't do this? When I'm weighing that up, what is the kind of, without being horrible, what is the ROI of not or doing this?
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes to build a business case, especially because it's relatively new. Wellbeing in business is relatively new, so people see it as being quite a fluffy thing sometimes, but it does have a real commercial benefit. And it obviously depends on how you do it and how you go about it. You've got to be evidence-based with it, and if you can look at it in terms of the individual people and structuring it in the way of those protective factors and stuff. But it's interesting because I've looked way back at since mental health awareness and everything started to come onto the market. So that started around 2007, where the government sort of thought we should really do something about this. So they started to put some money into mental health awareness and running some campaigns around it to get people talking more. By 2012, there was about 100 million pounds spent on raising awareness of mental health. In contrast to that, it's very, I'm not saying anything, but there might be some conspiracy theorists out there who can see a pattern, but the mental health services across the country within the NHS had their funding reduced by 105 million. So there was all of this awareness being raised, but there was less services in order to cope with the people reaching out. So what we saw was everybody talking about it, and like I said, referrals went up into the services 300% or so, but there wasn't anyone there to be able to help, and the really restricted funds. So that led to people needing to deal with it on their own. So how that impacts a business at the time, so in around 2014, the impact to businesses was about 26 billion per year in the private sector. Wow. That equates to about, I think it's £1,056 per head in a business. So that's from people being off sick. About 95% of people lie when they're off sick with mental health issues. They'll say that it's a tummy bug or they've got a cough or whatever. So only about 5% of people are actually honest with their employer why they're off, and then they find out after the fact. about 300,000 people. The figures for this was around 2017. Around 300,000 people left their jobs because of it in that year. So all of this contributes towards having that figure per head. So that was back in 2014. Now, with the lack of services and the lack of solutions there, but awareness is still being raised, we've looked at the different figures going on out there, and we estimate that it's gone up to around 1,304 rather than 1,056. So it's gone up by, what's that, about 25%, because there haven't been solutions in place. So if a business of 1,000 employees, they could estimate that it's costing them about 1.3 million or so, 1.4 million. And there's these two elements of absenteeism and presenteeism. Presenteeism is being at work, but not really being there and maybe making silly mistakes because you're not thinking straight or something like that. Presenteeism costs businesses twice as much as people being signed off. But the issue is that if people are signed off, they don't focus on protective factors. They'll focus on maintenance factors, staying in bed and doing all of this stuff that adds to their condition.
And I imagine if somebody in a particular team is not on their A game, not performing as that's going to have a knock-on effect to everybody around them as well. So it's not just one person that's underperforming. Yeah, it's going to be a team problem. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you look at we've all worked in a team where we've had to carry someone. Yeah. I'm sure you have, Paul. Like I said,
I work with you, John, so.
Yeah, you still work together, so I know that you have. So there's, if we look at it in the way of protective factors, and throughout an entire day, not necessarily just a working day, but from waking up to going to sleep, you've got a certain amount of time to do things that are suitable and that are going to have a positive impact on your well-being.
Yeah.
If there's something going on in work where someone isn't performing as well, and then you have to pick that up, maybe you've got to work a little bit later, or maybe you've got to work through your lunch break or something like that, that takes away from your protective factors. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that that's going to have an impact on your mental health and well-being, but it's also going to have an impact on the way that you're processing thoughts towards that member in the team. Yeah. If a business is getting in the way of somebody's protective factors, that's where people can start becoming quite resentful, motivated, all of these different things towards either that individual in the team that they're having to carry or the business as a whole.
You're making so much sense. It's sounding so much clearer and more black and white, which is what, as you were saying earlier on, with what is typically seen as a kind of woolly topic. So that as being as it is, what kind of strategies do you feel that an organisation, even like mine, where would I start on that process? What would you be recommending?
Well, yeah, and to be honest, keeping it as simple as possible, because I've heard about loads of different businesses trying to implement Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all of these different very good structures, but they tend to work for individuals more than a population. So businesses are a population, even though we want to treat everybody as individuals and all of that sort of stuff. Business have a finite amount of things that they can do. There was a few surveys done across the UK about where do people see the responsibility lying for their mental health. 50% of the population believe it's at the workplace. The rest of it is healthcare providers, the government, the individual themselves. So businesses do have a part to play, but I think sometimes it can be quite frightening that businesses think that they need to turn into clinicians or they need to turn into doctors, but it's definitely not the case. So the way in which businesses can have a positive impact is to structure well-being in an appropriate way. And well-being is broken down, and these protective factors I've spoken about and these positive behaviours people engage in their lives, they break down into 5 areas. So that is social connection, so how we connect with people. It is being active, so physically being active. It is giving, So not necessarily donating things, but giving your time, your knowledge, your expertise, that sort of thing. It's taking notice. So that's not necessarily mindfulness, but it's being present and in the moment, and having methodologies in order to help you become present and in the moment. And then there's one more. Can't remember what I've said already. Yeah.
Being active, giving time, which I think is just fantastic. I think that in itself is something that we probably could do more of in and outside work. So I think it's very valuable. Taking notice, you talked.
Yes, and learning as well. So ongoing learning, and that is sometimes businesses put learning and development. It's within HR, but it's not often seen as something suitable for well-being or built into the well-being strategy. So how are our people learning? But it's not necessarily purely about having everybody learning all the time, but it's also not frightening people away from learning and allowing people to make mistakes. You've got to make mistakes in order to find out what works. So it's about developing a culture that allows that and doing different practices and different things for that.
These 5 kind of pillars you're talking about, if anybody who's interested, these are available for free on the Arthur Ellis website. But just can I just go back? You talk about kind of social connectedness.
Yep.
By definition, if somebody is not in a good place, they're normally moving away from everybody, and that's the last place they want to do. Is so that you're talking more about if you recognise that in someone else, that we're making connections and getting closer to people, or are you saying it from the other way around? You're asking somebody who's vulnerable to reach out a bit more.
It's, well, from a business's point of view, it's facilitating an appropriate amount of social connection between your teams. So it's really interesting that we encourage people to connect, whereas sometimes it can be detrimental. So bear with me on that, because it is very important, and loneliness is a real issue. But some people, too much connection can make them unwell. So by looking at that in a slightly different way, you can begin to structure how your people connect with each other. And it's not necessarily reaching out if something's bad. That's quite a reactive way to look at things. And the way that we need to start moving away from that is to become a lot more proactive. And we have an improved program. So we work in ways that's consistently improving mental health and well-being. So by working in that way, you're setting up the way that people could to connect in order to contribute to their well-being. So that does vary between teams, and it usually benchmarks off of how extroverted or introverted people are. So if people are extroverted, if they do have a wobble or they become unwell, this is very generic. It's not necessarily play by play for everybody, but if you're looking at just setting out a structure, if you have teams that are focused on sales and marketing, for example, very people focused, they're going to want to connect more than other people. If you are working in software development, for example, or engineering, typically those people are a little bit more introverted. So social connection is going to be much more exhausting for them. So they're going to want to connect a lot less. So there's no point in having exactly the same structure for the same 2 teams, the different types of people. You do loads of psychometrics and that sort of thing to figure it out. We've developed an assessment that helps businesses figure out how their teams think. But one of the things with extroverts is that they will be very engaging, and they'll be maybe the loudest in the room at meetings and flood all of their ideas out, respond to feedback, all of that sort of stuff. So it's very there and then. Introverts are probably the quieter ones in the meeting, but they're very analytical and they're very reflective. Their mind is going 100 miles an hour, even if their mouth isn't. So they will be a lot more tired after social events or after connecting with people, and they need a lot more time within the pillar of taking notice, for example. So it's about getting the ratios right.
Yeah, and I'm guessing these 5 pillars or principles, I guess, are they're not just to cope with people going back to work now. These are ongoing lifestyle things that businesses should be thinking about ongoing.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is one thing that I talk about quite regularly, is that the world isn't necessarily structured for well-being. We all rush around, and we all are thriving for more, and businesses are thriving for more, which rightly they should. But if you're doing that, then it becomes very short-lived, and that's what we're seeing. People are becoming unwell because of this lifestyle. So there's something called a thrive model. And the thrive model is, if you imagine kind of a thermometer, where it's green at the bottom, amber, and it gets closer to red. So green at the bottom is your absolute fundamentals that you should be doing, whether you're unwell or not, or whether you're experiencing issues or not. By making sure that's consistent, which a lot of people struggle to do, and a lot of businesses don't do, you're putting yourself at risk of not being as capable to deal with change, or being in a good place enough to be able to adapt with any situations that come up. If you are, and I know that a lot of businesses do look at building resilience and doing resilience things, if you have these things right, people will naturally be more resilient anyway, because they have what they need in place in order to cope with different issues that come up. One of the things that you can have a look at mental illness being is coping strategies. So if people develop a mental health issue, it's more than likely because they've found different coping strategies to deal with the situation that they're in. So if they've got positive ones anyway in their lifestyle and in their life, they're more likely to resort to those anyway.
That's very good. That's very good. Would you mind just unpacking a little bit more when you talk about taking notice? What do you mean by that?
So yeah, taking notice is about being present and being reflective. So it's having an opportunity to reflect on, in some ways it pairs with learning as well, because you can reflect on how you dealt with situations. You can see how well you did, what could have been improved, all of those sorts of things. But especially taking notice is especially effective with things like anxiety. Something like social anxiety disorder, for example. A lot of people think that mindfulness is very helpful for anxiety, but clinically it's actually not recommended. It's specifically noted in manuals and different they're manuals and big books. Okay. I really we have, but I don't sit there and read them all the time. I'm not that geeky. But mindfulness for anxiety is specifically not recommended when someone is experiencing an anxious situation. So anxiety stems from a situation, or being confronted with a situation that we have maybe not come across before, or it's in the future, it's uncertain. So we develop different thought processes around what could happen, what's the outcome going to be, all of these different things. Those thoughts typically stem from our past experiences. So if we've been made redundant 5 times in our life and we get called into the office all of a sudden, that's where our mind goes. That stems. Yeah. So something like taking notice is if people are anxious, rather than things like mindfulness, and you're having all of those different thoughts, the last place you want to be is in your mind. It's not very helpful. Yeah. So what you need instead is something called grounding. You need to be grounded, and that's bringing you back into the present. So you're not worried about the future issue or the future situation. You're focused on the present moment. So so there are loads of different grounding techniques that you can build into your working practices, but it's more about building the if you can build reflective methodologies into your practices. And you can do this just by small tweaks to the way that you review things, the way that you have your meetings, the way that you provide feedback. You can do that. So rather than focusing on what's in the mind, you focus on what's in the present. So that's kind of the pillar of taking notice, and it goes towards learning as well.
Okay, well, I can highly recommend that everybody looks at those 5 pillars on your site, because I think it would help after this event just to go through them one at a time. Got a couple of questions come through, if I can.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm not going to say who these are from, just for their own privacy, but somebody's got a team of 10. It's a small business. My team aren't taking time off, but sometimes I think they've left their brains at home. I will tell you that I go into companies all the time. The amount of companies and people I work with who are saying exactly the same thing. I'll read on. Sometimes I think they've left their brains in bed. How do you introduce a program without people feeling singled out? That they aren't a particular sociable bunch. They're data analysts, so we're going to work out who this is now. So they aren't the type of people that would normally put their hands up and say, listen, I'm okay to talk about this. Let's all get in the room and cuddle together. So yeah, how would you approach that challenge?
So introducing something, let me just make sure that I've got it right. It's quite a long question. Can't see it. So it's a small team of 10. They're data analysts. So they'll probably, obviously this is general, but they'll probably fall into the introverted thing that we spoke about earlier on. So they're probably not likely to reach out. They're probably quite quiet in meetings. So the connecting needs to be quite small. One of the things that you can do, and one thing that we've got to build in with our wellbeing structures, is making sure that whatever we build in can also contribute to the other pillars. So with this particular team, what I would suggest is, because they are introverted, the thing is with them having meetings or taking things on board, they'll be over analytical. So I can understand where that worry comes from of they're going to suss me out and they're going to know what I'm trying to do. So there's one way of doing it, which is just being completely open and expressing your concerns to the team as to what's happening. But there's also other ways that you can do it through different activities and different exercises. So when people are introverted, and we've seen it before with a software business, it was a slightly larger team. I think it was about 90 people. And they had a lot of data engineers, data analysts, software engineers in there as well. When they were receiving feedback or when they were in meetings, they wouldn't be talking. They would be analysing, and they would be looking at what people are saying, looking at what people are doing. And that's fine. But the issue with it was that the thoughts that they were having, they were taking home with them. And it was impacting their sleep. They were becoming intrusive. They were overthinking all of these different things. That led to quite a few issues and negative ways in which to do these things. So one of the issues with that is that introverted people tend to be less assertive. So they'll be a lot more passive. They will just take on information and they'll just deal with it by themselves with these intrusive thoughts. So one thing for that particular team that will probably be helpful is to build up their assertiveness. So the way that you can do that is by focusing on different activities in your Connect bubble, where you are engaging the team in providing each other feedback and helping them to, you can kind of make it a game where you're competing to be the first person that speaks out. So something like, I don't know, like charades, for example, where you've got to, stay out different things and be assertive to get your point across while someone's trying to do something. It can be fun. It doesn't have to be, let's sit down and talk about mental health, but that impact can have a real good knock-on effect to how they deal as a team moving forward. And it not that it's under a cloak or anything like that, or you're not misleading them or trying to manipulate them, but that's the area that particular team will need to develop, and doing activities that will naturally develop it without sitting them down and talking to them about mental health. No. So you can be inventive with it. So.
I definitely can resonate with that question, and the fact that when you go into a company and you need to talk about a subject that's needed in the team, but the moment you bring it up, the person that's needing it most probably realizes they're being singled out of it. And so even the subject came to mind, self-awareness, then getting everybody together to talk about self-awareness and go, John, talk about self-awareness, when already we're pointing you out for that reason. So I think giving teams information, getting everybody to talk about a subject and making it completely across the board, everybody's there if they want to talk about it, or even be part of the training in a way, giving their opinions on things, I think has always worked very well in other areas as well. Just one more question here. Excuse me. Someone else has been setting up a team and actually introducing some mental health first aid training.
Yep.
Obviously, everybody's got their own take on what that would look like, and they're encouraging time out to talk about non-work related stuff. Stuff that probably, I guess, typically we would be doing it as we're walking around the office, and we're not doing it now. I've seen a lot of companies setting time aside for that. So this particular person doing that, and encouraging their teams, if they are working remotely, to get out of the house. You don't have to do that at lunch break. You can do it when you're needing it. And so maybe giving the freedom to do that. Yeah. And also the expectation that you may not be on call all the time. Being able to give that person the freedom to, turn the things off for a second and go out and have a walk. Can you think of anything else that if a company was putting that kind of first aid pack together for their team, any other suggestions you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, so I would have, it's difficult not to become dictatorial if you're going to target things, but I would specifically target things. One area we haven't necessarily covered is being active, and being active, yes, it has a really good physical element. So getting out and just into the fresh air, really, really good. But there's a certain amount of times that are optimal for certain people. Like if you're getting out and going for a walk, you only need 20 minutes a day in order for it to stimulate different things to protect your mental health. Right. So certainly if people are maybe unmotivated or apathetic a little bit at the moment, we've spoken to a lot of people who are finding that people are becoming more and more unmotivated, a bit apathetic, so they don't really care what's going on, and quite flippant. So one thing about being active is that it actually it develops. We've all got something in our minds called, or in our brains called the hippocampus. You've probably heard of it before. So the hippocampus is responsible for memory, it's responsible for learning, and it's responsible for a part of emotional intelligence called emotional regulation. So Paul, you've probably been snappy before at somebody, had a bit of a short temper, I can imagine.
Never.
Now, usually when you're stressed out and when you've got all this stuff, we become a bit snappy. So in order to regulate that, in order to regulate our emotions and how we deal with the situations, if we get 20 minutes of exercise a day, it spurs on something called, and increases something called neurogenesis. So that is improving neurotransmitters, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, which help with all of these different things. So that's where I said earlier on about having that green banner on the Thrive model as a consistent thing across businesses, that immediately, if people are getting that amount of well-being, or those amount of protective factors in their working day, then they're going to be much more resilient to cope with different things like that. So you will have less arguments, you'll have less people snapping out. So for any pack like that, what I would do is make it specific to the type of people. So like we said about the difference between sales teams and software engineers and how they need to connect with each other and that sort of thing. I would also be quite specific on having walking meetings for everybody. Well, even if it's just on the phone, not walking together, but, making sure that you have a 20-minute walking meeting every day for everybody. And it's sort of targeted, and it's kind of like a game, and you can begin to do quite inventive things with it, but be specific and set minimums. Because one thing that we're going to see very soon is that the night's drawing, and the issue is, and why people get so impacted throughout winter, there's a higher increase for illness obviously, but people's mood drops a lot, and that's because there is less time in the day in order to perform your protective factors, so you do less of them. So if businesses can build them in, they're going to have a much more consistent and a much more reliable workforce throughout that time.
Okay, I mean, just to build on the last question. I was thinking when it comes to encouraging being active, is that being able to do something, you may not be able to do it as a team currently, being able to do something as part of a joint exercise, whether, you know, somebody, well, let's see if we can walk 100 miles this week as a team. Everybody's
relays.
Relay, that type of thing. Absolutely. So I think as part of a toolbox, I think that's a great thing, because everybody's doing something as a team, and as a business, we do like teamwork. So my last question actually just touches on what you were talking about just then, and also earlier on, about we happen to have gone into lockdown during a really good summer, and that's made a big difference. With the nights closing in and all that, how would we approach adjusting our well-being approach to our teams? So instead of like introducing something and we're going to run with this exactly same model 12 months of the year, week in, week out, how would we adjust it to compensate for those different seasonal things?
Yeah, we do need to. There's a huge amount of mental health issues or poor mental health that comes through winter. There's a couple of clear reasons for that. If we're all in the UK and Ireland, then you know, we don't exactly have the best sunlight. So anyway, by definition, we are all vitamin D deficient. Don't run to the doctors and get vitamin D tested, because you're going to be deficient anyway. Sure. But vitamin D has a massive impact on our mental health. It's one of the primary causes of depression. So if you don't have enough vitamin D within your body, you can become depressed. So I can never remember if it's Switzerland or Sweden, but one of the countries have 3 months of darkness throughout the year. Sweden, yeah. So suicide rates skyrocket throughout that time. Because people are, one of the reasons anyway, that people aren't getting the right amount of minerals and nutrition in their body through the sunlight. So we all need it. So one of the ways in which to combat that, and to combat that risk, is to open up lunchtimes a little bit, for example. Allow people to get out when it is daylight, so that you're encouraging people to get out of the house or get out of the office when it is actually daylight. Because if they're working into the evenings, or they're working into how late it gets, where it actually gets dark in the winter, like 3 o'clock or 2:30 sometimes, they're not going to be able to get that when they finish work. So we need to start adjusting the times in which people have free in order to do their protective factors. So
are you doing that internally?
I'm going to be doing it so that we have longer lunch breaks. So I'm going to double the lunch breaks to 2 hours, and people are going to work a bit later on in the evenings. So we work from 8:30 till 5:30 anyway.
Okay.
And people take as much lunch as they want really at the moment, but we do need to be a bit stricter with it. So we're going to open it up to 2 hours through the winter months, so that people have more time, especially with the way that gyms are and that sort of thing at the moment. If you want to pop to the gym, you know, a class is an hour, so that's your lunch break gone. If you want to have a shower and all of that sort of stuff, then you need to build in time around it. So it's, like I said right at the beginning, it's not business's responsibility to build a clinical understanding or be clinicians, but it is part and parcel of the job to facilitate these things. Absolutely. It will have a really good long-term impact. So if you can, you know, facilitate people getting the relevant amount of sunlight during the winter, and helping the protective factors remain consistent for the workforce, then that is, you know, that's the best bet of combating these different issues.
John, I could sit and talk to you for hours, and we have done on many occasions. So I'm probably going to pull it to a close there. Big thank you, huge thank you for giving up your time to do this. I know that you not only understand the kind of the business side of this, but I think the human side of it as well, and just how important this is. recommend everybody goes to the Arthur Ellis website. Can you just say the full website?
It's arthurellismhs.com. MHS for mental health support, not NHS, like we're trying to hijack anybody.
And people obviously can come and talk to you and pick your incredible brain as even more. But I think if we just call that a close, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And
thank you very much.
As Laura mentioned at the beginning, this is a recording. If anybody wants to kind of play that back, it will be on the Community Hub part of the BITA website. But I'll just say thank you very much, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm sure we'll be doing something again very soon.
Thank you very much.